Bom dia. O painel já vai começar. Eu só queria reforçar o aviso que as perguntas são feitas através do Slido, que pode ser acessado pelo aplicativo da conferência, ou para quem não achar, e achar mais fácil, no próprio browser, vocês colocam sli.do, vai aparecer uma tela com uma hashtag, coloquem BC19. BC19, e tudo minúsculo, não sei se maiúsculo funciona, e aí vocês vão poder acessar para fazer perguntas e votar nas perguntas que vocês mais gostam, tá? Muito obrigado.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatriz Marinho.
And I am Gustavo Coutinho. We are students at Harvard College, and it is a great honor to introduce the panel, More Business, the Brazilian Unicorns.
Today, we bring together 4 of the most prosperous Brazilian startups. From finance to education, these are the leaders in the forefront of innovation in Brazil. So first, I would like to introduce Cristina Junqueira, the co-founder of Nubank, a fintech company that acts as a digital bank and credit card operator. Welcome, Cris.
I would also like to introduce Tony Kyo, the CEO of Didi for Latin America. Didi is the world's leading mobile transportation platform and operates in Brazil under 99. Welcome, Tony.
We also want to invite André Street to the stage. André is the founder of Stone Pagamentos, a credit card processor fintech that provides solutions to help entrepreneurs increase their sales and productivity. Welcome, André.
We would also like to introduce our 4th speaker, Ari Neto, CEO of Arco Educação. Arco's mission is to transform the way students learn by delivering quality education at scale. Welcome, Ari.
And finally, to moderate this debate, we have Michael Nicklas. Michael is a partner at Valor Capital Group, a venture capital firm specializing in growth equity investments in US and Brazil cross-border. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to start out by thanking the Brazil conference. Yesterday was absolutely amazing. It was so inspiring to hear the different speakers, from Salman Khan to Mike Krieger, talking about Instagram, hearing about these companies that are having such a significant impact in Brazil and around the world. I also wanted to thank the organizers here, especially the students from Harvard, from MIT, and from the Boston area. One of the things that I've learned is that putting together a conference is actually like a business, and it's really a startup. So I just wanted to say to them that, if you guys were a startup, and you are, vocês seriam unicórnio. Então, parabéns. So we're going to start out, I'm just going to make a few quick comments about the unicorn, the concept of the unicorn, for some of those who aren't familiar with it. And then also talk a little bit about MIT and Harvard and how they play into the unicorn phenomenon. I would start out by saying that MIT and Harvard have not only been at the leading edge of startups, but actually of venture capital itself. Many of you may not know that Georges Dorier, a French immigrant who is widely recognized as the pioneer, the first venture capitalist, was actually a former assistant dean at the Harvard Business School. He, together with Ralph Flanders and Carl Compton, who was the former president of MIT, founded a company called ARDC in 1946. And it's actually interesting because he immigrated or migrated from France to the United States. He actually joined the Army. He rose to the rank of Director of Army Planning and then became a Brigadier General. With ARDC, it was actually the first venture capital group in the world. And they made an investment in 1957 of $70,000 in Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, which became one of the big players in Route 128, which is the tech corridor here in Boston and Cambridge. That company then later went public in 1968. So that investment of $70,000 actually IPO'd at a valuation of $355 million. So it's actually a unicorn before we had a unicorn, if you correct the currency to actual numbers. Another interesting stat with MIT and Harvard is that between them, they have over 45 unicorn founders. So I think we're well represented in having this conversation here today. Finally, I think it's just interesting to point out that, with all the discussions about immigration, it's not just startup founders that bring a lot of diversity and talent to the United States, but actually in this quintessentially American space, which is venture capital, it was actually founded by a Frenchman here in the United States. So I think that's something important for us to keep in mind. The unicorn is a legendary creature that has been described since antiquity as a beast with a single large pointed spiraling horn projecting from its forehead. References go back to the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, the ancient Greeks, and medieval Europe. In medieval and Renaissance times, nobody had actually, even but with all the cultural references and all the people talking about unicorns, nobody had actually captured a unicorn. So it's interesting, in the medieval period, actually in Denmark, if you're familiar with Game of Thrones, if you can imagine, the crown throne in Denmark is actually made of unicorn horns. They're actually narwhals, which is a medium-sized whale that has a protruding horn. So this has been something that has been sought after for a long time. Actually, the only captive unicorn that we know of is on the Herald of Scotland. So it's interesting that Scotland has chosen to identify, and it was chosen because it was seen as a proud and haughty beast which would rather die than be captured. And finally, I think a very interesting reference to unicorns is from Leonardo da Vinci, who would have made a great startup founder, given all his ideas and expertise. So from one of his notebooks, I actually want to read to you, he has a formula for capturing a unicorn. He said that the unicorn, through its intemperance in not knowing how to control itself, for the love it bears to fair maidens, forgets its ferocity and wildness, and laying aside all fear, it will go up to the seated damsel and go to sleep on her lap. And thus the hunters take it. Clearly, this is not a common occurrence, and so maybe this explains why a unicorn has actually never been captured. So in short, a unicorn is a mythological creature which is much sought after, rarely seen, and to this day never captured. So it's amazing to have actually a unicorn panel here today. So transitioning, the concept of a unicorn startup, a startup that is valued at $1 billion or more, was actually coined by Eileen Lee from Cowboy Ventures in a TechCrunch article about 5 years ago. The percentage of startups that reach a valuation of $1 billion is so small that they are rare as the proverbial unicorn. Less than 1% of funded venture-backed companies actually achieve a valuation of $1 billion or more. And it's actually appropriate that we're hosting this panel here because Eileen Lee, interestingly enough, attended MIT as an undergraduate and then went to Harvard Business School. So very appropriate for this conference. At that time, 5 years ago, she identified 39 unicorns. At last count, there are over 300 unicorns globally, 150 in the United States, 80 in China, and at least 6 in Brazil, with at least another 10 well in the birthing process. The characteristics of unicorns: technology-driven, scalable, operating in environments of extreme uncertainty, and independent. So they're not spin-outs from larger companies, they're born from the ground up as a startup. And you may say, well, what does this have to do with venture capital and this billion-dollar valuation? What it has to do is that portfolio companies, when a venture capitalist builds a portfolio, they know that a large number of those companies are going to fail. So in order to make up and to return capital, you need to have outliers, and these are companies that have high-scale valuations. So with this, I'm going to turn to the panel and start with a few questions. It's been said that to create a big business, you need to solve a large problem. What is the problem or problems your company is solving? And tell us a bit about the journey to get to where you are now. And we can start in order here with Ari.
Okay. Thank you. Great to be here. Actually, the company that I founded a little bit more than 12 years ago was conceived here in MIT in Boston. So it's great to be back. Basically, we're trying to solve a big problem in Brazil, which is the quality of education. We are trying to scale a model of high quality education using technology to do that. We're trying to train teachers to perform a better job in schools. We are delivering a platform that enables students to have high quality content, high quality assessment in order to impact their outcomes in the universities so that they can get into the better courses. So in the end, I think everybody's gonna talk a little bit about that, but we are attacking this problem of the quality of education, but more than that, we're trying to deliver value to our customers. We're trying to treat them in a different way that the industry had treated them in the past. We're trying to generate a lot of value, and with that, that's the only way you can build a sustainable company and grow in the long term.
Congrats, Ari. So I think most of the concepts you're gonna see here are pretty much based on the same thing of putting the client first. We will certainly see in all these companies that I know for a long time, mission-driven companies, tech-enabled, and each one in each sector. In our case here, Stone is resolving the problems of the merchants in Brazil, helping them to have a better solution for payments and software. And they were, for a long time, poorly served by the incumbent companies in credit card acquiring. So we created a distribution platform and a technology that provides a much better solution for them. Even better in the smaller cities of the country where these guys are even more overpriced and underserved. So the company has been growing for the last 7 years when we started. And it's a bunch of young people that created the technology, that created the distribution model. That is a very disruptive distribution model for Brazil, given the continental proportions we have. So we go directly to these merchants and help them understand their cash flow and understand how they can operate their business better. So and there is a lot to do, I think, in the financial system in Brazil. We will still see a huge transformation for the next years. And I think it's also a result of a very intelligent public policy of creating more competition, which is something that is very welcome in all the sectors in Brazil. Brazil was created as a country with a lot of different oligopolies, and now we are seeing in all sectors, or at least in many sectors, people talking about free competition, just to make sure that the consumers have the best deal for them. So once you create competition and you create the same field for the companies to compete, then the best should win, and consumers will certainly win. So I think there is also something about all these companies that have created things for in their sectors with that objective.
Bom dia. First of all, thank you for making this panel English. I'm still learning my Portuguese. Hopefully next year I can speak Portuguese on this panel. So I'm from DDN 99, and the problem we are solving is transportation industry. There are three major problems in the transportation industry in Brazil. The first one is congestion. One of the first words I learned in Portuguese is o engarrafamento, because the driver just kept talking that words. And the problem to that is, I think it's car ownership, because today if you go to Brazil, right, if you go on the street, oftentimes 2 lanes were occupied by idle cars. They were not driving, but they were parked on the sides. So if people are not buying cars, people are sharing cars, so those lanes can be freezed, right? So those lanes can be used for driving cars. And today the ownership of cars in Brazil is about 70 million cars out of 210 million population. So about out of 3 people, there's 1 car. But in US, it's 200 million cars out of 250 million people. So in Brazil, today is already very occupied or very congested. It's impossible to have everyone own a car. So our solution is to share cars, right? When you need a car, when you need to go from A to B, You don't need to buy a car. You can just call 99. You can just call service. So that's the first problem, congestion. And second problem is affordability. It's very expensive to go from A to B in Brazil. So one of the data I saw is that an average Brazilian spend about 20% of their household income on transportation. But for example, in China, people only spend 10%. In US, people spend 7 to 8%. It's very expensive to go from A to B in Brazil. Another example is that to take a bus, it almost costs $1 to take a bus, to take a public bus. But in China, it costs like 20 cents US dollars. So our way to solve this problem is, first of all, have a very low take rate compared with our competitor so that we can make the transportation more affordable to consumers. And two is to innovate new products such as pool. So we launched the product of pool in Belo Horizonte so that it can be more affordable to go from A to B. And the third problem in transportation is safety. Oftentimes you'll see that drivers get robbed or women get sexually harassed when she's going to some place. So we leverage our algorithm to identify potential patterns, right? Like for example, if it's at a bar area, if it's a woman consumer, she needs to go to a remote area. And then we'll send a message to both drivers and passengers that our safety team is monitoring this ride. Another initiative we are taking is that we're starting to install dash cams to drivers so that the trip can be monitored and we can better protect our drivers and passengers. So these are the problems we are solving in Brazil. Thank you. Obrigado.
Congrats on the Portuguese. Bom dia, gente. So the problem we're solving, I would argue that 100% of Brazilians in this room would relate to the problem of looking at your credit card statement or your checking account statement and seeing a charge there that just doesn't look right? I'm pretty sure these aren't due. Like this is a fee or an interest charge that just wasn't supposed to be there. And then you feel like that anxiety like building up inside and you think, oh my God, I'm gonna have to call a call center, listen to the horrible music, navigate that infuriating IVR to finally talk to someone who barely speaks Portuguese, will not have the power to solve my problem. And then like 45 minutes later, if the call doesn't drop, which often does, then you finally just give up, like you're tired and exhausted, and it's just not worth it because of like 20 reais or 30 reais. You know what? Like, it's just not worth it. And the way that we think about those things at Nubank is that is just inconceivable. That is just outrageous. That is extortion. And we've started from that point of view. We started from looking at the Brazil market and just wondering, why the hell are we paying the highest fees in the world and some of the highest interest rates in the world and having one of the most horrible experiences in the world? Why are we so conformed or why have we settled for being abused as consumers for so many years? And the answer is very complex. It's a highly regulated sector with very powerful people on top of it. It's an oligopoly, as André said. And, you know, it's very hard to crack that sector. You need a lot of capital. But you know what? Like some very crazy folks, you know, started this 6 years ago when everyone kept telling them that they were nuts. And here we are today. So myself, David, my partner, who's the CEO of Nubank, and Edward, our other co-founder and CTO, we started this 6 years ago, of course, not knowing what we're up against, but just simply tired of not doing enough or you know, determined to do something. And the truth is, regulators were so ready for more competition. And consumers were so ready for an alternative. And investors were so ready for someone to tackle the opportunity within financial services of using technology, using design, using data science, and you know all those wonderful tools that we have at our disposal right now to solve those problems that have been there for so long. So what we found was, you know, there was a lot of opportunity to be sought there. But we like to think that we continue, there will always be true to our purpose, which is essentially to get rid of all the bullshit, the complexity, everything that is keeping people from truly having control over their finances and having their personal dignity restored back to them. So that's the problem that we're solving.
So it actually almost, they make it sound easy, don't they, when it comes to starting a company. basically all you have to do is put the customer first, be customer centric, and everything works out grand from there. Everybody says that we live in a world where everything is accelerated. Everything happens more quickly. Everyone's stressed out, and I don't think venture capital and startup fundraising in particular, is an exception to that rule. I think I've seen as a VC, and I know you guys have seen as founders, there's been a compression in the fundraising cycles. It used to be this 24-month cycle where you would raise, from at the seed stage, you would raise enough money to do 24 months. At month 18, you would go out and raise your Series A, and then your Series, 24-month Series B. All that's gotten compressed. Actually, if we look at some of the statistics, unicorns in the United States, it used to take on average about 7.5 years to reach unicorn status. And that was 3 years ago. Currently, it's just under 6 years. So we're seeing this acceleration and this compression. And what the challenge that we see there is really, what does it take to grow it at unicorn speed? It's one thing to come up with an idea. It's another thing to come up with, putting the customer first. But how do you actually grow a company quickly, which is, one of the big challenges. So I'd like to hear from each of you just how you've addressed that challenge, and then we're going to touch on the fundraising process, which I know is a big distraction for founders as well. Let me start with André.
I remember. So here in the U.S., it's people pretty much know how to do it because there's so many companies in the past that has gone through this process, and I remember 3 or 4 years ago, I was reading the HBR, some of these HBR articles, and I bumped into the blitzscaling article, which was written by Reid Hoffman. And I indeed recommend for everyone the book, which is, I think he tried to figure out a way in which you have to ignore certain things in order to grow so fast, right? In a summary of that is that he created a lot of techniques for you to ignore certain things and to give attention to what really matters in this process. But I can say that the very first one is that if you, not related to the book, but I recommend to the audience the reading what Reid has written about this process of hyper growth, right? And I think all of us has been through this cycle here, so the different opinions will help. But in my opinion, you have to have a vision in where your market should land in 5-7 years before you start, right? After you start, and with that vision, you will create the technology to get there. In the financial market, you have to be very concerned with the regulation. If you're not tuned with that, you might be in bad shape. You might go to jail. But in not regulated sectors, you have to have also a vision of how the market should behave 5 years after you start. And you have to secure the funding for the growth. You will need a lot of funding for this process. So you have to anticipate yourself for not being stuck in the middle of the process without capital. So you need to anticipate the next phases that you're going to face, and make sure you have the right investors also to help you in the next phase. The first 150 people that you hire are the most important things. The most important thing you do because you're setting up the culture. And in Stone's case, for example, we have 4,000 people, and we've grown from 0 to 4,000 people in 7 years. So it's physically impossible to know all of them. So you have to make sure that these 150 people set up the culture together with you, and they are very strong in the culture. So this is also very important. So you have to make sure these guys they have all the characteristics that you want. And culture is about what you tolerate. Culture is about how you define your decision-making process. And this is something very important to create a durable company when you're growing. It's very easy to distract and creating something that 5 years looks so much different that you can become a big company, but then you're not proud of that. So it's very important to create that in a durable way. And I think you have to do that very, very carefully internally. Think always making sure that as the company grows, you go back to the purpose, which is serving better the customer and making sure that the customer is being well served. These companies will only survive in this new world of having now the incumbents trying to react, figuring out that disruption is going on, if their services are 10 times better. So I think also the way Chris presented Nubank was a very good one, because you have to think totally different. If you cannot have a marginal better service, you have to have a 10 times better service in order to sustain that over time. And then keeping the mindset of putting the client first and making sure you're putting the incentives for the people as now a bigger company to put the attention on the front line. So many people have different opinions, but
that's right. Cristina, I know Nubank has grown very rapidly too, so tell us a little bit about the process and the challenges and some of the learnings you've had.
Of course, building up to what André just said, culture is definitely a key piece. So one of the things that we did do right, I remember the very first day that David and Ed and we started working together roughly 6 years ago, we were already discussing the type of culture that we wanted to have at Nubank. That's one of the things that we got right. Luckily, we do see a lot of startups that just rush and grow, and then 2 or 3 years in, they have like 400 people, and they're like, "Oh, we got to figure out that culture stuff, right?" And they have a culture. They may not like it, but it's going to be pretty hard to change it now. So I think that was one of the key pieces of our foundation, plus a lot of alignment on the vision and everything that you just said. But I would also argue that the key piece is really execution. And I bet that David will join me to say that it was much harder to go from 0 customers to 1 million customers from 100,000 customers than from 0 to 100,000. Just scaling is hard, because in the beginning, of course, you're fresh and you have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, and you can do a lot of things that don't scale. But when you find yourself with millions of customers, those early fixes or those early solutions, they can last anymore. So you gotta rethink the way that you're solving problems. You gotta really seek the efficiency. You gotta put processes in place that will help you, manage 4,000 people in your case, but in our case, 1,500 or maybe 2,000 that we're gonna get to by the end of the year. So definitely just scaling and thinking how things can be, again, 10, 20, 30 times better, but also at 100, 1,000 larger scale, right? So that's definitely the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think you covered very well. I would add that, especially for very young entrepreneurs, you see a lot of lack of focus. So you want to do many things at the beginning, a lot of energy, very smart people, strong culture, and you just think you're able to do everything at once. So I think the decisions that you try to make in a strategic standpoint, the focus on solving a specific problem, it really helps in order to grow the business rather than trying to pick many problems and solve them at the same time. So focus.
Yeah, I echo with other panelists. I think purpose and the culture is extremely important. I think both 99 and DD have a history of 6 years. So over the past of 6 years, we have been debating a lot about our purpose. And our purpose is to make journey better, make mobility better. It has always been this purpose, and we stick with that purpose. And for culture as well, especially after the merger between DD and 99, The reason why we merged, and I think so far we did pretty well, is that the two teams have very similar cultures and values. We believe in create value for customers. We believe in integrity. We believe in personal development. I think these two are very, very important. All the other panelists mentioned. Another point I want to add on is about technological tailwind. I think the reason why Michael mentioned that in the past several years, unicorn become faster is probably because the technological innovation, right? So in our industry, it's the smartphone that make mobility possible, right? Like 10 years ago on PC, it's very difficult to get a taxi on a PC, but smartphone make it possible. And in the future, probably new energy is autonomous driving that make this industry grow faster. So like how to leverage, how to capture this technological tailwind is also very important.
I think that's a really good point, because we've seen, and one of the differences between Web 1.0, the first internet era, if you will, from 94 to 2000, and the current era is that, during the first era, we were really laying the infrastructure, right? The data centers. You used to have your own data center if you were spinning up a startup. None of the infrastructure was in place, and certainly not the smartphones, which was something, post 2007, and in Brazil, only really in the last 2 or 3 years has the penetration reached a point where, you get virality. And of course, with the uptake of social media in Brazil, you get this ability to do customer acquisition and actually put the customer, in first place by having that immediate touch point. I think one of the things I heard you guys saying, which is so important, is the culture, right? If you're doing a scale up, if you're scaling a business really quickly, how do you do that, and how do you lay the groundwork for that? And I know, Andre, you have a close connection to Harvard in terms of culture. You've sent how many people to the OPM program here?
Well, to OPM, Augusto, how many? 10 or, yeah, around 10. But we sent to many different programs. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason is we have to keep learning with the best all the time. And we don't care about where the knowledge is. Someone invented the plane, so you get into this machine and you can fly wherever the people you're looking for are. So we just don't think we should have boundaries to see people where. So we go to China or many times. There's so many things that we can learn with China. So we come to the US to study. We try to go to the best places where we can find the specific knowledge that we are looking for, and we encourage the whole company to do the same. So it's part of our culture is to seek for the knowledge independently where it is. So sometimes you don't even know, but the person is in one department is flying to the US for a course and we will stay 2 weeks outside and studying. It's the culture of keeping yourself tuned to what is going on and studying and developing yourself all the time. So, and it never ends.
Yeah, just to comment on that, it's really hard to build a culture, but it's somewhat simple. You just need to talk about that all the time. You need to do that on a daily basis. You need to keep that as a very strategic a priority into the company. So usually people lack that priority in terms of culture. You have to assess people according to the culture. It's not only about delivering the results, achieving their goals, but if they are culturally fit with what you believe, with your values. And it's very easy to destroy a culture. So it's really about spending many, many years trying to build a good culture and keeping your eye all the time in that, because otherwise you'd lose that.
And just a very quick comment. So, and it's not only courses or coming to Harvard or coming to a university. Sometimes you learn with other companies. So you just have to travel and see. So if you're resolving something, entrepreneurship is about this. It's about you will figure it out. You will find someone who knows more than you about that thing, and you go, travel, study, watch all the videos about it, and go deep. So many times we see people in the company traveling to see other entrepreneurs that have resolved a piece of problem that we have that is similar to ours, so we can get inspired and we can copy that certain piece of solution. So I think this is also important, is not having a problem where the solution is, just go and find the people who resolve that thing.
That's very true. I did that with Stone.
That's good. You can copy whatever you see there.
If I may, I think culture is something that most founders spend the vast majority of their time in, as they should. And I think there's a common fallacy on the culture discussion. Like often a question that a lot of people ask when we're at panels like these, and it makes them sound really smart, so that's very tempting, so they always do it. It's like, oh, how do you keep the culture when you get so big, right? Like that's the question that we always get. And there's the regular answer, which is, oh, we do our best, like we talk about it all the time, which is true, that's all true. But I think that at Nubank, we've spent a lot of time thinking about that question, because over and over, as we ran engagement surveys with our employees, as we took like snapshots of the organization every, 6 or so months, and trying to understand, the direction that we're going and where we're at, the truth is culture did change. And it's supposed to change, because it's just not possible for you to make decisions or tolerate things or risk or, a lot of different things equally when you're 10 people or when you're 1,500. That's just impossible, right? So if you take a snapshot of the company every 6 months, it's a completely different company. So what we've settled was in agreeing the things that should absolutely not change, which are about our purpose, so what we're about, truly about. So essentially like fighting complexity, getting people back the power that belongs to them over their lives and their money. So those are the things that we're truly passionate about, and that's our north. And also our values, right? So the way that we think about things, and the way that we want to be perceived, and the way that we want to continue to make decisions over time. But other than that, things will change, and as they should, because we'd rather be a slightly different company, potentially, making a little bit more structured decisions or tolerating a little bit less risk in one dimension or a little bit more risk in another dimension, because, maybe now we have more capital, whatever that is, but worth a lot more than being exactly the same company that was, so cozy and interesting and fun in the beginning with 10 people, but that was worth this, and that impacted, so few lives, right? So I think a little bit is just embracing the fact that it will change. And I think a lot of companies resist that. And it's a lot of wasted time internally discussing, oh, we're changing, and resisting change. When in my opinion, it's really about embracing change.
Yeah, what we do is immediately after the merger, we rallied all our employees to create this culture and values together. So we have this debate that we list out like 20, 30 cultures that potentially represent DD99. And so people debate, like, what are the 8 cultures, what are 8 values we really care about? And people put on walls, people put on the T-shirt and celebrate. And we talk about that a lot, as Ari mentioned. So the second thing we do is when we recruit and hire people, we will not only look at their capabilities, but also their values, whether the values would fit our profiles. And lastly is about assessment, also Ari mentioned. In our performance review, we not only look at their business impact, but also whether they represent our culture. So our S performance, which is the most outstanding performers, not only need to over-deliver results, but also inspire other people in terms of cultures.
Thank you. I think it's interesting. I think we're at a real inflection point in Brazil in terms of the evolution of the ecosystem, both in terms of the types of startups we're seeing, the quality of the startup founders, the level of expertise and experience that's being created. And so even though a lot of people criticize the concept of a unicorn as sort of a buzzword, in a lot of ways it's actually an inflection point for Brazil, right? If you think about it, one of the critiques of Brazil is there are no exits. Everyone's always looking to Argentina, Mercado Libre, or OLX, and it's like, where Brazil's the largest economy, why haven't they created these large players? And over the last few years, we've seen for the first time, the amount of capital coming into the company, into the country, into startups being over $1 billion, an inflection point. So I was curious to see from your point of view, what do unicorns enable, and is it really something valuable? Because it's a step towards exits. We're seeing serial entrepreneurs, it spins people out. We've seen people from 99 starting new businesses, for instance. I don't know if that's been the case with Stone yet, but it creates ecosystems like the PayPal mafia, famously here in the United States. So that's sort of a lead-in to a question is, what do you see for the future? What are the next areas or sectors for disruption, and where do you think we'll be seeing the next unicorns? And is this a valid concept, and is it a valuable one?
Let me take that one first. Listen, I totally agree it's a buzzword. So when we started Nubank, the way that we thought about this was, well, if we can get 1 million customers in 5 years, we would be roughly $1 billion company. But back then, we called it $1 billion company because there was no such word as unicorn. There was no such word as fintech. That term just didn't exist. And it's amazing to think about how those words are used like so constantly today. And they weren't even there when we started, 6 years ago. But I do think that we are a little bit in an inflection point in Brazil because when we started, again, none of those words were there, but also none of the access system was there. David, my partner, he had been with Sequoia Capital, which is, one of the largest, most successful venture capital firms in the world, for 2 years, prospecting opportunities to invest in Latin America and in Brazil, unsuccessfully, because there weren't any. Because people were still trying to sell diapers online or copy, whatever app that worked in Germany, and there were no true original companies, right? And they were all scratching their heads because things like Waze, as you mentioned, engarrafamento, like they should have been invented in Brazil. Why the hell weren't they? Like in Israel, they don't even have engarrafamentos, And in Brazil, we're just like so afraid of tackling like these big problems. We're still at a phase as a country to try and mimic like things that kind of worked out and trying to tropicalize their business models and try to see if they could work. But we truly have, changed that mindset. We're seeing more and more companies trying to tackle like big problems, mobility problems, education problems, and so on. We like to think at Nubank that we did also a pretty good job in terms of educating investors. So we were the first investment in Brazil for Sequoia, for Founders Fund, for DST, for QED, for a lot of funds that, we didn't even know Brazil. Like they had no idea of the size of the opportunity. And we did, or homework of educating them on those opportunities. They're already like making other investments in other startups and, helping founders build companies there. And I wouldn't worry too much about the exits. I know that's a big sign. And to be fair, like these guys have IPO'd, so, that's an exit, like to some degree. But at least at Nubank, we are building something for the long run, right? Like we're building a company for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And we're lucky to have investors in our side that are supportive of, this vision, this long-term vision. So I think we would be making very different decisions, sadly, and not having the freedom to focus on what truly matters for the long run if we didn't have investors that are really long-term oriented, and aren't concerned about the exits, right? So I think that gives the whole ecosystem in Brazil a lot of freedom to experiment with different business models and to really seek true innovation, not just like the marginal gains, and not just like, using a little bit of technology of simplifying this, specific process, and instead of just getting rid of the process in the first place. Why do we need that, right? Kind of like breaking the wheel type of thing, right? So I think it is an inflection point.
I think it's important because really, ultimately, if you think about it, technology is evenly distributed now, right? Young entrepreneurs, whether it's in Russia, China, India, Brazil, have access essentially to the same tools, to the same culture, agile development. They think the same, and they have the ability to implement. So the difference is actually the problem sets that you're dealing with, right? And some criticisms of Silicon Valley is that like all the solutions currently are like assisted living for hipsters, and so it's just making life easier for kids and stuff. Yeah. But in Brazil we have problems and challenges that look like problems and challenges around the rest of the world. And so I do believe that we're going to begin to see things. Like GymPass is an example of a company that started in Brazil, an affiliate network that makes it easier to access gyms, is spread throughout Latin America, Europe, and the United States. So that's a Brazilian solution, a Brazilian innovation going global. But continuing with the other panelists, but where do you see the opportunities in Brazil for disruption and the next unicorns?
Healthcare.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I was telling.
Do we have any healthcare entrepreneurs in the room?
So healthcare, totally. But I was talking to Mike yesterday after the Hack Brazil competition. I was telling him, because he's thinking about his next step, and I was saying, listen, like in Brazil, from the time you wake up in the morning till the time you go to bed, like you trip over opportunities to use technology and to start businesses all day long. Like everything sucks in a lot of ways, right? Like everything is broken, you know? So pick one of those, whatever hurts, you know, whatever you care the most, whatever is your pet peeve, and just go fix that, right? Like there's so many pain points. There's so many things that are wrong. You know, so many industries that are so inefficient and expensive and horrible for consumers. So why not? Just pick one, you know?
Mike, totally right, Chris. So, and I like those solutions that came from Brazil. That then you find a benchmark in the US or elsewhere, but the real problem is a very Brazilian one, right? So I think that all these things that these guys have created here are all about you know, diving deep in the problem in Brazil. If you just copy something from the US, would not work. So, I like the approach of Nubank. For example, when Davi, partners of Chris, was in Sequoia looking for things in the time that Brazil was in a sort of almost a bubble of startups. People were over-investing in many different ideas that existed in the US. There was a time that people were copying everything that was being made in Silicon Valley. I simply don't like that, and most of those things didn't fly. The ones that really became something important were those entrepreneurs who really focused on resolving something specific in Brazil that was a big pain.
Jabuticabas.
Yeah, those jabuticabas of Brazil that people understood and created something to resolve. And then you look to the US, then you look to other developed countries to see how these things operate in developed world, and then you can enhance it, but not creating from there. So I think the very good things that we have in Brazil were created in Brazil from people that were looking to the problem and not making analogies all the time.
And Tony, how are you seeing the opportunities in Brazil for new companies? China obviously is just a complete laboratory for innovation, the integrated applications, chat sort of driving all sorts of ancillary services. Where do you see opportunities in Brazil?
Yeah, I think there are, as Christian mentioned, there's lots of opportunities in Brazil. If you go to China, right, so we sometimes travel back and forth. In Brazil, we have to carry cash, but in China, no one uses cash today. Like if you go to a Chinese restaurant, for example, there are very few waiters or waitresses because you can scan a QR code, you can start to order food, and you can pay by mobile payment. So everything is done seamlessly. So I think there's lots of opportunities in Brazil, but I also agree with Andrew, you have to go local. Mm-hmm. That's how you can win versus the US companies, for example, right? So as a 99, for example, we found that half of our drivers do not have a bank account. So rather than our competitor who asks our drivers to go to open a bank account, we just send them a 99 card. And what we also find is that our drivers are very short on cash. Like I ran to a female driver once, and she's running out of gas, right? So she went to a gas station and filled half of her tank. So I asked her, why don't you fill the full tank? She said, I don't have money. So what we do is we give our drivers money every day, rather than our competitor, they give the money every week. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I think probably do both ways. Once look at the benchmark in US and China, maybe you can see what could happen in Brazil in the next 5 to 10 years, right? For example, the restaurant mobile payment happening already in China. And then combined with your local knowledge, combined with the understanding of the local points, I think those will create lots of opportunities.
Are we ready for questions from the audience? Okay, so these are in order. to all panelists. How do you perceive Brazil's talent today? What kind of professionals are companies finding it harder to recruit and retain?
Oh, let me take that one. Listen, this is the hardest thing. So I was talking to some students yesterday, and one of the questions was like, "Oh, I read an interview from you from like 2 years ago, and you said that what was keeping you up at night was hiring and finding talent." Like, still is. Yeah, absolutely, positive. So from the beginning, of course, it was super hard to recruit when we didn't have a brand, didn't have customers, didn't have a product, didn't have money when we first started. But it continues to be so hard. Not because there's not a lot of interest in Nubank. Luckily, we've built our brand and people are aware of who we are and, are passionate about our mission. But the level of execution that we demand is just so high that it's very hard to find talented people to the high bar that we have. So we've been searching all over the place. And I was also talking a little bit about diversity yesterday. We do have a fairly diverse team at Nubank. I keep repeating those. So if you've heard me before, don't, bear with me because some people haven't. But we do have over 40% of women at Nubank. We have roughly 34% of people that identify as LGBT. We have people from over 25 nationalities. I actually speak much more English than Portuguese on my day-to-day because we have people truly from all over the world, from China, from Japan, from India, from Egypt, for Christ's sake, Chile and Netherlands, and even Argentinians, right? So a couple now. So we do. The concept behind that was the problem that we're tackling is just so big and so hard that we just cannot afford not to look for talent anywhere it is, right? And however it looks like. And we absolutely got to chase those people with different backgrounds and different, cognitive thinking and different types of mindsets, and put them in very diverse teams so that they can combine their points of view and get to the best answers that we can possibly find. Now, when we talk about tech, it is such a hard problem in Brazil because Brazil forms so few engineers. It's like 250,000 undergrads every year alone. Like that's for the whole country. I'm not even talking about tech. While China is forming like 2 million engineers, software engineers every year. So it's extremely hard to build a tech company when the talent pool for tech is just so shallow. So even from that standpoint, we've been trying to be creative. So some of our most talented developers today, they don't even have an undergrad degree. And they're self-taught, and we're partnering with multiple, sometimes NGOs or other types of institutions that foster teaching of computer skills. So there are, a couple of them that are focused on teaching women how to code, which is especially tricky because we don't have that many women in technology. Just the other day, there was a hackathon only for women held at Nubank in São Paulo, which was amazing. It's the hardest problem to tackle for sure. It is the biggest bottleneck for our growth, hands down. We don't need capital. All we need is people. So listen to me when I say this. We're hiring, okay? Think about a function. We're hiring for that function. Think about a seniority level. We're hiring for that seniority level. So please apply. Tell your friends. Come to Nubank.
Just to add on your comment, Chris. Actually, we're here to hire.
Yeah.
Don't you know that?
Yes.
We're trying to convince people not to go to investment banking and consulting.
Yes. In a ways from our family, away
companies.
from our families, exactly.
I actually hire a lot of people from consulting and banking.
See? Precisely.
Moving to another question. This is from Andre. It says, Nubank, Stone, and especially 99, and I'm sure it applies to Arcos as well, have faced regulatory issues in Brazil, for example, the Lei do Retrocesso. How have you managed it, and what have you learned? And I would add maybe, and what can be done, what type of things should be implemented to facilitate the life for startups and innovation in Brazil under the regulatory frameworks?
Well, I think we are living in a Brazil that is transitioning, economically speaking, and probably culturally speaking, because of the way things are done. I think the Brazil we all want to see is much more ethical Brazil, Brazil with more competition. Again, I go back to that concept that we had just so many oligopolies in all sectors, and we have to make sure that the government pays attention to create the field, the same field for everyone to compete. And what I learned in this journey of Stone is that we have a lot of great people in government that are there to work for the good, for the best for Brazil, and I think the result of what we are doing is a public policy that was very well set up by the central bank to create competition in the sector. So I think, of course, everybody was advocating for that. Nubank, Stone, and other companies were advocating for free competition, which is something that we didn't need to, right? But at the same time, the government need people from the market to tell what is going on. So I don't think we faced issues on regulation. I just think we were in a market that was transitioning to a different setup in which these technology companies were going or will participate in the market, and the banks will have to accept and live with that. So I think it's a transition.
If I may, just to add to the central bank angle, and if you allow me a tiny digression. Recently, Nubank was voted or nominated by Fast Company, the most innovative company in Latin America, and the top Brazilian company in the top 50 in the world. And that made us very proud. But the way that we think about that is we don't even have an innovation team, which is something that, frankly, we're very allergic to. We like to have a company that everywhere from legal and human resources and collections, like every single team is thinking about how to innovate, right? And how to do things differently, how to challenge the status quo. And today here, Bruno, sitting right here, is our head of public policy. And I'm proud to say that that team is one that has been extremely innovative, in my opinion, within Nubank. So the way that we've engaged with regulators, not just from the central bank, but also, Ministério da Economia, previously Fazenda, and so on, and to be partners, truly thinking partners, because there's a lot of the technology that we've developed that can help regulation to be more modern, to actually prevent the risks that the regulators want to mitigate, in a position of just creating friction. And that has been an amazing collaboration work that has led to so many new things. So the Elan's Goldfein's tenure at the central bank as governor was amazing. There were a lot of things that came out of the central bank that truly benefited consumers and competition. And we're extremely excited to work with the new governor, Roberto Campos Neto, and his team, which is a stellar team. A lot of people stayed from the previous management, and a couple people joined. And also within the Ministério da Economia with Paulo Guedes, there's so many talented people. And we're talking to the secretaries of desburocratização, digitization. I'm trying to do Portuguese and English, sorry. But anyway, there's so much. Think about open banking or the Brazilian GDPR, LGPD, which is the new law of data protection. There's so much that tech companies like ours can partner and collaborate with governments to actually make those regulations accessible and effective, and not just increase friction and costs into the business models, which is precisely what we want to run away from. So it's been great to see how many talented people are there, how truly concerned they are in terms of doing what's best for the country, for consumers, for competition. And it's a great opportunity for us to engage and to show the power that technology can have in terms of impact, in terms of effectiveness, in terms of financial inclusion, financial education, so many things that have such a dramatic potential to change the country. So,
and Chris, I think many people in the government are learning what technology can improve for society. And I think everybody, and also the companies, the private sector keeps in mind everything that we advocate should be for the benefit of society.
Yes.
So then everybody's going to be fine.
I was so impressed by the work that the central bank did on the cybersecurity regulation, for instance, which is something extremely new, not just for them, but for the whole world. And we were very active in that process, and the result was actually pretty good, of something that could have been, essentially a lot more breaks into, what technology could do. And it was actually an enabler, so really good.
Ari, do you have any comments on
I think Tony has.
From my experience, I actually think Brazilian government are actually quite open for innovation. What I heard is like they want to position São Paulo as the Silicon Valley of Latin America. And we met with the transportation sector, we met with the mayor of São Paulo. They're actually very supportive of our industry. And I think our GA and the legal team did a fantastic job of presenting to the government that the value we create to the society, right? How do we help the transportation industry? How do we create values? How do we create jobs for the drivers? So I think it's very important to be collaborative with the government, with the authority.
We have a question here from a young entrepreneur. It says, basically focused on what should be their next steps after college. Should they, go directly and try and do a startup? Should they go work at a startup? What size? A larger company? Go to management consulting? What type of experience would you recommend and do you think is valuable for
Stone.
There we go. I think Christina's probably going to jump in too.
A little less
Chris,
self-serving.
interrupt her microphone.
No, a little less self-serving. Listen, I answered this question.
I'll get my chance. Arco.
I won't say Nubank, I promise. Listen, I answered this question to the students yesterday. Here's what I told them and what I truly believe. There are no good moves or bad moves per se. Like going to XYZ company, to management consulting, investment banking, Nubank or Stone, whatever, per se is not a good or a bad move. It's the reason why you do that, right? So if you're going to McKinsey or BCG or whatever because you think that's the only place you're going to be able to learn, or that you're going to be the only place that you can be surrounded by truly smart people, that's bullshit. That's definitely a horrible reason to go there, right? But, if that's what you truly love is, you really enjoy engaging with senior management and conceptually solving problems, and you just really want to be a partner at a consulting firm, that's going to make you happy, go for it. That's your prerogative, right? Likewise, if you want to join a startup because that's what everyone else is doing and, what's, high these days and what's going to look good in your resume, horrible reason to do so. So my advice is think about what truly matters for you. I would argue, for all my career, I've been solving for learning. So I did consulting right out of college, and it was amazing. It helped me learn so much and definitely prepared me for when I was ready to do other things. But it's really about what you want, what is important for you, not what everyone else is saying, and you shouldn't define either success or what you're about based on what anyone else is saying. It's about what you want.
If I can compliment quickly, I was joking here. So Chris is my friend, so. I like to talk about that with some of the students. We were talking to many people yesterday about it. It's just a matter of aligning what you want in the next 10 years, 20 years, with the knowledge that you have to create to be in the point where you want to be in 10, 20 years. So I think for those young students that will have the summer job experience, it's good to have different experiences, working in something that is more structured, in a bigger company, working in a startup, having a summer. I don't know, depends on what you want for your life. But you have to, I think the earlier you can know where you want to go, the better to create the experiences, and then you can derive a little bit. But I always recommend to take a summer in a company that is growing a lot, because it's a so good experience that you probably, if you think about going somewhere else, you're probably going to fall in love with that, because this process is so rich for your life that I will indeed recommend.
Great. So I think this is our last question, but it's a question for the panel, but we'll probably start with Chris. Cristina, it says, what advice would you give for women who want to start companies in male-dominated markets? Andrea, would you care to? No.
So this is also a question that I get a lot. And listen, two-part answer. First is there's a lot of people that say, oh, that's bullshit, that doesn't really matter, or whatever. It's just irresponsible when you look at so much research that, shows how much bias there is against women. It's just like outrageous. So it would be extremely irresponsible to just like deny the bare existence of that. On the other hand, what I also tell women is we don't have enough time to wait for, the world to be fair so that then we can get on with our careers. There's, we gotta solve that problem while we're here. So we gotta continue to discuss it, continue to draw attention, continue to design strategies to overcome that for sure. But in the meantime, sadly, we just gotta be better than men. That's just the truth. So it is.
But you already are. So
I know. No, so I mean, in regular conditions, the environment will favor a man, all else equal, versus a woman, right? So what I tell women is just be better at something, right? Because otherwise, odds are you're not going to have that opportunity. Having said that, I think there's a lot of just finding the way that you can crack and find what's important in every market. So I've been with financial services and technology my whole life. I'm an engineer by background, so I've always been in extremely male-dominated worlds. I think it's about finding the right references, staying true to who you are. There was a time in which you had to be one of the guys to actually crack that. I'm happy this isn't the world anymore and that we can speak up. When I first started my career, the way to manage those things was just like to pretend that you hadn't, heard something that someone else said to you. Luckily, today we can say, you know what, like I'm not comfortable with that comment. Please don't do that. I'm here to do my work, and that's okay. That's finally okay. Hopefully one day it won't be okay to even say those things. We're getting there. But yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, be better. You'll find a way.
No one else is going to touch that, right? I think that's a good idea.
Well, in Stone, men are minority, so
there you go.
Maybe there's some time for the men to defend.
And we're seeing that in venture capital in Brazil too, with women taking very important roles in different companies like Mubadala and different VC groups. So I think it's an exciting moment for that. I think with this, our time is up. I'd like to thank the panel. It's exciting to have finally found some unicorns. Not presencialmente, and I hope that next year when we get together again, we won't have enough room on a panel to put together all the Brazilian unicorns.
Hopefully.
So thank you very much. Help me thank you.